As some of you know, I tend to make videos on this channel discussing different Stoic texts. At my last video, a lot of you recommended Epictetus' Discourses, so I read it at your suggestion. And honestly, if I'm being honest, it was probably my least favorite Stoic book that I've read so far, and I'll explain some of my ambivalence in this video, but a lot of this book I think can be summed up in one word: non-attachment. So let's talk about it. So Epictetus believed that we should limit both desires and aversions as much as possible. If you want things, like wanting pleasure, and you want to avoid things, like wanting to avoid pain, then you will always live at the mercy of what he called externals, which can also be called fate, God's will, external circumstances, whatever you want to say. Everything that's outside of your control, basically. So the way he saw it, if you limit your desires, then you won't be disappointed if you don't get what you want. And if you limit your aversions, you won't suffer if you end up getting something that you don't want. Because remember, pain times resistance equals suffering. So if we want to avoid pain, painful experiences are an aversion to us, then we're going to turn it into a lot more painful than it needs to be. Having been a slave for much of his life, Epictetus was very concerned with freedom. And true freedom, he believed, has nothing to do with your actual circumstances. You can be freed from slavery and still find yourself enslaved to your desire to control externals. True freedom, he thought, is when you are indifferent to both pleasurable and painful life circumstances, because the only thing that we can really control is our judgments on things. And judgments for him is basically how we appraise what's happened to us, the meaning we make of things. So he gives this example. If the weather keeps us from traveling, we sit down, fret, and keep asking, which way is the wind blowing? From the north. That's no good. When will it blow from the west? When it wants to. What should we do then? Make the best use of what is in our power and treat the rest in accordance with its nature. And what is its nature? However God decides. So imagine for a second that you're traveling and it's raining. Most of us would feel pretty upset if we can't do all the outdoorsy stuff that we had planned, if we can't get cute photos, if we have to carry an umbrella. But what if we were instead to make the best use of what's within our power and just let things be? And say, it's neither good or bad that it's raining. It just is. Let me just go about my day. Another example. Someone used to say, I don't add to my troubles. Someone once said to him, you are being tried in the Senate. Good luck. But it was 11 in the morning, and at that hour he was in the habit of taking his bath and exercise. Let us be off to exercise, he said. When he was done, word came that he had been condemned. To exile, he asked, or death? Exile. And my estate, what about that? It has not been confiscated. Well then, let us go to my villa in Aricia and have lunch there. This shows what is possible when we practice what is necessary and make our desire and aversion safe against any setback or adversity. I have to die. If it is now, well then I die now. If later, then now I will take my lunch. Imagine this type of absolute freedom, where even being sentenced to exile or to death couldn't make a single difference to you. What would life look like if we could embody this type of indifference? For me, for example, illness anxiety would all but vanish. So if you're waiting for a biopsy result at the doctor, you'd be indifferent. If the news is bad, oh no, so what do I have to do? I have to go get chemo? If the news is good, okay, great, I'm gonna go have lunch. Or if your partner hasn't answered your text in 48 hours and you don't know if they're cheating on you or if they got in a car accident or what's going on. What would it be like if you just continue to do what you need to do? And if they cheated on you, then they cheated on you. And if they got into a car accident, then you'll cross that bridge if you get to it. He gives another example of if you're in court. And he says, as long as desire and aversion are under your control, there is nothing more to worry about. If, however, you want to keep hold of externals, your body, belongings, and reputation, then my advice to you is that your preparations better begin early and will have to be long. You will need to research the character of the judge and make a study of your opponent, too. If groveling is called for, then be prepared to grovel, to weep and holler, too. Whenever externals are more important to you than your own integrity, then be prepared to serve them the remainder of your life. So if you're in court, that's often a very high-stress situation for people. Someone like Epictetus would say, I'm indifferent to the outcome. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. I'm not going to agonize over this and try to manipulate fate to be in my favor because I'm not at the whims of my desires and aversions. I'm going to be fine no matter what because my integrity is intact. If we took this attitude, the things that terrorize and enslave our minds would cease to hold any power over us. A student should practice how to expunge from his life sighs and sorrow, grief and disappointment, exclamations like poor me and alas. He should instead say, if it pleases the gods, so be it, instead of poor me. Now you could say if it pleases the gods, or if you're like me and you don't believe in God, if it pleases the universe, if it pleases destiny. How would it look to replace poor me with if it pleases the universe? Every time you have that impulse to think poor me about something, say, whatever the universe wants. It's much stronger than me. I'm not going to try to put up a fight. I'm not going to try to disrespect the universe or God or whoever. Like if your boss is constantly picking on you, if it pleases the universe. Your business isn't doing really well right now, if it pleases the universe. A war breaks out in your country, if it pleases the universe, because there's nothing you can do about it. Come and appreciate the resources you have, and when that is done, say, bring on whatever difficulties you like, Zeus. I have resources and a constitution that you gave me by means of which I can do myself credit whatever happens. But no, there you sit, worrying that certain events might happen, already upset and in a state about your present circumstances. So then you reproach the gods. If you believe in a higher power, then complaining about life circumstances is basically like reproaching the gods. Like being angry with the people who decided what's going to happen. In another part, he says, you swear that under no circumstances will you disobey, press charges, or find fault with God and his gifts. You won't shrink from life's essential tasks or trials. In other words, stop complaining and just start helping yourself. Someone is saying, but my leg is crippled. Are you going to be at odds with the world because of one lame leg? Shouldn't you rather make the world a gift of it and gladly return it to the one who gave it to you originally? Are you going to make Zeus your enemy and set your face against the fates, with whom Zeus spun the threads of your destiny at the moment you were born, laying out his plans for you? The gods have released you from accountability for your parents, your siblings, your body, your possessions, for death and for life itself. They made you responsible only for what is in your power, the proper use of impressions. So why take on the burden of matters which you cannot answer for? You are only making unnecessary problems for yourself. I really do think that sometimes we as humans overcomplicate suffering. Like when he was talking about the person complaining about their crippled leg. I have a 3-legged cat, and I gotta tell you, he doesn't even notice. He doesn't even know it's missing. And he's the happiest little boy. We as humans put up so much resistance to the adversity that comes our way, and it ironically makes us suffer more. The true man is revealed in difficult times. So when trouble comes, think of yourself as a wrestler whom God, like a trainer, has paired with a tough young buck. For what purpose? To turn you into Olympic class material. But this is going to take some sweat to accomplish. What if we were to choose to see every trial and tribulation that we go through as a wrestling match or as going to the Olympics? We'd be choosing the pain. We'd be making meaning of it. We'd be saying, this is me training for something, for a fight that the universe has decided to put me in the midst of. He also says, you do not seem to realize that the mind is subject only to itself. It alone can control it. I say this all the time, that we can only truly save ourselves from suffering, even in therapy. It's not the therapist that's curing you. It's you using the tools at your disposal. It's why no one can truly make us unhappy without our consent, like the Eleanor Roosevelt quote. Epictetus says, so what oppresses and scares us? It is our own thoughts, obviously. He also says, so in life, our first job is this, to divide and distinguish things into 2 categories. Externals I cannot control, but the choices I make with regard to them I do control. And this is actually very similar to an exercise that I have in the personal growth journal, where you draw a circle and everything within your control you write down in the circle, everything outside of it is stuff outside your control. Everything outside the circle you release, and everything within the circle you do. That's essentially the art of life. It's figuring out what can I do and what can't I do? What must I accept? So in another dialogue, he says somebody's complaining because of all the problems they've got. And they're saying, you think I can listen to poetry in my position? And the other person says, why? What is it? I'm sentenced to death, and the rest of us aren't? That's a very succinct way to put it when it comes to the fear of death. Like, if you're afraid of death, it's gonna come. That's not an issue. It will come. It's just a matter of when. As for social anxiety, whenever I see a person suffering from nervousness, I think, well, what can he expect? If he had not set his sights on things outside man's control, his nervousness would end at once. Take a lyre player. He's relaxed when he performs alone, but put him in front of an audience and it's a different story, no matter how beautiful his voice or how well he plays the instrument. Why? Because he not only wants to perform well, he wants to be well received, and the latter lies outside his control. This is so true. Social anxiety or performance anxiety is never about fear of not doing well. It's about fear of how other people are going to perceive what you're doing. And that is an external. That's something that's not within your control and must be released because ironically it makes you perform worse. Your objective, my friend, was to see to it that you make natural use of whatever impressions come your way, that you do not fail in your desires or have experiences you don't want, that you never be unfortunate or happy, but free, unrestricted and unrestrained, in sympathy with God's rule, which you submit to cheerfully, at odds with no one, no one's accuser. Lead me, Zeus, lead me, destiny. Whenever we see a person in mourning, we think to ourselves, she's crushed. If we happen to spy a consul, we think, there goes one lucky man. The sight of a person in exile elicits how tragic in response. A beggar prompts us to think, poor guy, he doesn't even have money enough for food. These are the insidious opinions we need to concentrate hard to expunge. What, after all, are sighing and crying except opinions? What is misfortune? An opinion. So this is where it starts to get a little bit radical for me, where he's suggesting that basically nothing is good, nothing is bad. Only our impressions about what happens are good or bad. And this is where for me it started to feel like, I'm not sure that total non-attachment to what happens in life is altogether healthy. This is another dialogue he's describing. So-and-so's son died. Since it's nothing he can control, it isn't that bad. So-and-so's father left his son nothing when he died. Not something the son can control, so not bad. Caesar condemned him. Outside his control, not bad. He lamented those events. That is in his control, and bad. He withstood it like a man. That is in his control, and good. He says, prepare yourself not just for death, but for torture, exile, flogging, and the loss of everything not belonging to you. You will be a slave among slaves otherwise. It's the stoic idea of preparing for the worst case scenario so that you kind of become indifferent to it, so that if it comes up, you're already prepared. You're not suffering. Just keep in mind, the more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. Then he says impressions, striking a person's mind as soon as he perceives something within range of his senses, are not voluntary or subject to his will. They impose themselves on people's attention almost with the will of their own. But the act of assent, which endorses these impressions, is voluntary and a function of the human will. What he's describing here is basically the difference between sensation and appraisal. We all sense what's happening around us, but the meaning that we make of those things is totally up to us. It's totally within our control. When we are guests at a dinner party, we content ourselves with the food on offer. If anyone were to tell the host to put out fish or cake, he would seem rude. In real life, however, we ask the gods for what they do not give, and this though they have provided us with plenty. How would it look if we moved through life as if we were guests at a dinner party, just content with whatever we're given, understanding that it's not really our place to decide what happens and what doesn't happen? He says, ask, is this something that is or is not in my control? And if it's not one of the things that you control, be ready with the action, then it's none of my business. What others think of you, how others treat you, the life circumstances currently being thrown your way. What if you were to say, it's not within my control, so it's none of my business? Every challenge, remember the resources you have within you to cope with it. In time, you will grow to be confident that there is not a single impression that you will not have the moral means to tolerate. This, I think, is really true, and that's truly the greatest gift that you can give yourself, is the confidence that no matter what happens, you will be able to handle it, even the direst of tragedies. Remember, it is not enough to be hit or insulted to be harmed. You must believe that you are being harmed. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation, which is why it is essential that we not respond impulsively to impressions. Take a moment before reacting, and you will find it easier to maintain control. Again, that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Really, no one can make you feel anything without your consent. Your emotions are your responsibility and, to some extent, within your control to regulate. As for the fear of being disliked, if you're ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. Why aren't you ashamed that you have made your mind vulnerable to anyone who happens to criticize you? so that it automatically becomes confused and upset. So with all this being said, I hate to say it, but I feel like this book has made me less of a stoic. The way I see it, I feel like I'm kind of half a stoic, half a hedonist, and I'm sure the philosophy bros will chastise me for saying this because I'm sure they're going to tell me the two philosophies are completely incompatible, but allow me to explain what I mean. And do also let me know your thoughts on this because I'd love to hear what you thought of this entire topic. I think that I'm stoic in the sense that I believe in radical acceptance, meaning not resisting painful emotions or experiences when they come up. And also everything in moderation, everything with temperance, and living a life of integrity. Those are stoic principles that I believe in. But I think I'm hedonist in the sense that I desire as many pleasant experiences as possible. Travel, savoring good food and drink, enjoying nature's beauty, beautiful self-expression. I love all these things that feel amazing. And I think I'm really starting to master the art of radical acceptance, this non-resistance to painful experiences. Because, for example, the election results that recently happened, they didn't bother me in the slightest. Was I a little concerned for the US? Yeah, I was a little concerned, but I've fostered this attitude of no matter what happens, even if like World War III breaks out where I live, I will be able to handle it. And I also recognize that life is always just a pendulum swing from left to right, from chaos to peace, from fascism to very extreme leftism. And so I don't really occupy myself trying to control the swing of the pendulum. I recognize that it's just inevitable. But what about that other half of the equation of not desiring anything? That's not something that I aspire to. And I'm not altogether sure that it's healthy. The way I see it, desire is a sign of vigor, of health, of vitality. Is it feasible to completely resist our very human and very animal urge to want pleasure, to oscillate towards pleasant stimuli? Isn't it kind of an act of self-rejection to change the way that we're naturally built to this extent, where we don't want anything? Also, for me personally, art, which I see as kind of synonymous with beauty and pleasure, is my core value. It's like my number one value. Because to me, anything that is beautiful can be turned into art. Art is typically beautiful, and both beauty and art are very pleasant. That's why I group those together. So because that's like a core value for me, you're just gonna have a really hard time convincing me that seeking pleasure is a bad thing, because it's like the number one thing that I live for. Something else is that if the point of avoiding desire is so that we can avoid painful emotions like disappointment, isn't that kind of a form of emotional avoidance in and of itself? And I believe that any type of emotional avoidance turns into suffering, right? Like, do you understand what I mean? Like, if your point is, I want to never feel disappointed, therefore I'm going to numb myself and not want anything. Yes, you're numbing yourself to the disappointment, but you're also numbing yourself to the pleasure. And I think the two kind of even out. I'm not sure that one's necessarily better than the other, but I do take a little bit of issue with being pathologized for desiring things. And also, if we're completely non-attached to everything, it might provide us with this total psychic freedom that Epictetus talks about. But I can also imagine it would be a little bit hurtful to the people around us. Like if your partner surprises you with a beautiful engagement ring, and your reaction is just, thank you, this is neither good nor bad. Or your child dies, and your reaction is, well, he was immortal, so if it pleases the gods. Attachment to some things means we value them. Like if your house is going down in a house fire, you'd probably be more attached to your wedding album than to a random book that you read. If we're attached to nothing, then we value nothing. And if we don't value the people that we love, how can that not be hurtful? And is total psychic freedom really the point of it all? Obviously, it makes sense why Epictetus would think so, because he was a slave. It would make sense that a slave would value ultimate freedom. But for me personally, I think there are a lot more important things in life than freedom. You know, like when you're in a relationship, for instance, you're not completely free. You can't do whatever you want, and I wouldn't want to be. This is something that I choose. It's an obligation that I cherish and that I want. I don't need to feel 100% free in life. So yeah, this is where, to me, I kind of took issue with some of the stuff in this book. But it was still really interesting, and I think still I will take some of the lessons moving forward. So definitely let me know what you think about all this, because as you can tell, I did really enjoy some parts, and then other parts kind of pushed me away a little bit. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.